I was introduced to music in the church as a young age. My dad was a minister. And my grandmother was a singer and a songwriter. And she had this deep, husky, alto voice that, and when she sang, she didn't stay exactly on the melody. She had this freedom in her singing. So that impacted me. Musically, I was trained classically. And unfortunately, though I love classical music and I love the training but the culture was sort of the fear of mistakes. And I was afraid to make mistakes. So music was sort of this thing that wasn't, I had no connection to it, except it was a mechanical thing. I learned it sort of that way. And it was in my teens that I discovered African-American gospel-style music. And it also reminded me of my grandmother, who had died when I was 8 years old. But that music, and that's jazz, has evolved from that, right? It was the music of the people who came over from Africa, who were in slavery here, this soul cry. And it was this freedom of this soul cry and the freedom of melody, improvised sound, call response was all part of that. And that spoke to me. I love that. And the big chords, which is the jazz side, things and theory. But there's something in that music that just, spoke to me deeply. Yeah. And I felt like there's this freedom. And so that was my connection. And then through that, I evolved into going also into more jazz singing, which was later, actually, because I was involved in church music for a long time. But the culture that I was in didn't, at first, they were really into the African-American sound. And then they evolved into a different style, and the evangelical church that I was involved in, I began teaching, and I developed a whole program on music. But I found that the music began to get boxed in, become more simplified, and became more formulaic. And what I saw happening in the churches was there began to be a alienation between the musicians and the congregation. Less and less people were singing. So I've seen that happen over time. That people became unengaged with the music, and so there was some sort of disconnect.
It became more concert and less.
Yeah, well, and less connecting. So that had bothered me, and I really wanted to. I was coming, I guess, a little bit disillusioned with all of that stuff too, and trying to teach the students like we shouldn't be there. We need to reconnect again. So for myself, I then had also become quite administrative because I was doing a college thing and had disconnected a little bit myself, feeling from music, feeling there was no. I had feeling nothing, so I needed to reconnect my own creativity and spirituality through music. And so through coming back to the African-American style, being able to be part of the Marcus Mosley Chorale, I conduct that choir now. That also led me into exploring more jazz for myself personally. And what I find with that with the freedom of the melody, that soul cry coming out, there's a connection and a conversation between you, your spirit, God, and the music. So there's this, first of all, this individual thing that happens where I found a new release and processing of my life and things I was going through, and God speaking to me through my connection with music now, in being able to just express from deep within. And when I sing a song, I have to connect to it. I connect to the words, I connect to the melody, but it becomes something else. It's that journey. And so there's that connection. It embodies the intangible in me, mind, body, emotion, spirit, that holistic thing. And then I find the other thing that's happened through this is there's a connection and a conversation between you and other members of the band, the people who are in playing with you. There's that conversation. You're inviting each other into the story. You're each interpreting it. You're each, there's this trust and flexibility to move wherever the music takes us as players. And I love the concept of if somebody gets, that there's no wrong notes. If someone starts to go somewhere, everyone just goes with them, and we journey back together, and it's not, you don't leave the person out there hanging. Yeah, well, good luck with that. I don't want to go there. There's this trust of us, we're in this together, and we're going to flow wherever it goes together. So there's this openness, inclusiveness, respect among the band. I find it generous and full of grace, which is what the Spirit is. Right? So there's that side. Then there's the extension of that that draws into a connection with the listeners. So as we share our stories, as we express our deep heart cries, then the people who are out listening will also experience. They go, oh, yeah. Oh, I get that. Oh, yeah. Somebody sees me. Oh, you hear it. Yeah, you've been there too. And there's this thing about it expands beyond our own individual. There's something bigger than all of us. There's something greater than all of us that is calling to us, that is leading us towards love, hope, grace, redemption. I always find the Spirit is always moving to redeem, to infuse love, to infuse grace, and in jazz, it can find place to do that because there's that openness. And so what I find with it, there's this vulnerability we've talked about because the vulnerability, there's a risk factor. It's raw, it's authentic, and so when we strip all those things away from us, the pride and when we're stripped down to being raw, and I'm out there, I just I start a scat thing. I just gotta do it. I gotta go for it. I'm going to be raw. And when we lay ourselves out like that, I find that then the Spirit moves inside of us, right? And we're honest and open, and then there's a connection begins to happen inside of us with each other and with those who are listening. So that's, I know that Jeremy Rigby talks about the Spirit being an improviser, and that he moves things, and I feel that that's it. He takes what we give and we lay ourselves out there, and he knows exactly what we need and where we need to go, and the listeners and the band, and so it's going to be different for all of us what we get out of perhaps a particular. I know that, and also Steve Guthrie, I don't know if any of you read his book, Creator, Spirit, and the Art of Becoming Human. He talks about the Spirit moving in ways we may not have expected, to a place we may not have chosen to go, bringing about an effect we may not be able to put into words. And that I find jazz is like that. It takes us sometimes to a place we never expected to go. But there's always this redemptive, restorative love, respect, grace that's needed in all of it.
The author again, please.
That was Steve Guthrie, Creator, Spirit, and the Art of Becoming Human. And then the other one was Jeremy Rigby. Yeah, he says the Holy Spirit allows us to engage with the world in a new way as an improviser.
The question I want to ask is when you talk about jazz bringing redemption in the music and then redemption in life. I'm not a musician. Can you explain what you mean by redemption in the music?
It's looking always to bring healing, to bring wholeness, So I find music connects on a very deep level. It's expressing whatever I'm going, whatever I'm going through is connected to it. So when there's pain, as I, create that, there's processing, there's a healing that begins to happen as there's a, yeah.
That's similar to what we were talking about yesterday in the Lamentations.
Yeah.
And the Psalms, yeah.
Yeah, it connects with our emotions, right? Or it helps us to get in touch with our emotions, which, and to, because we get so we want to jump in with our head, and that's what music does. It says, well, actually, maybe you need actually a little of this.
Yeah.
And it's that also, being uncomfortable, being willing to sit in the uncomfortableness of our pain and the things that we're processing through as well.
I like what you had to say about the listeners as well, too, because that was something I didn't tap into because I didn't have my notes with me. But I find, too, as a performer, a jazz performer, what we experience with the audience in a jazz worship situation is so different from what we experience in another type of venue context.
Yes.
I mean, obviously, with the exception of a place like Frankie's where they have their policy about listening. Obviously, you don't get that in a restaurant or a different type of setting because that's not what it's about. It's just, you're there to entertain, but in a different context. But one of the reasons I, too, have been gravitating more towards jazz worship is that connection that you get. It's so different from any other type of venue.
One of the things you said, Darlene, that struck me, and I guess the fear of mistakes sort of fits in that, in the performance, the songs become something else in the conversation with the musicians.
Yeah.
And as a way of collective storytelling that enfolds even the mistakes. And so when there's trust and a network like that, I see how the word redemption makes sense.
Yeah.
Because together it's a healing process.
Yeah.
The stories get unfolded in a larger narrative that everybody's sharing in the making.
Yeah.
And it's raw, it's authentic. And then the listeners then can participate in that and feel the resonance with their own experience in a way. So I appreciated you putting all that together.
Yeah, I think.
Yeah, and the soul cry.
That's a great
I
phrase.
love that phrase.
Yeah. Wonderful phrase.
But and it's interesting because, the spirituals, like James Cone, the spirituals in the blues, which and speaks of the African American experience of horrific suffering, but the resilience in that. And that the music created the agency to resist and to find stunning resilience in the midst. So it's not victimhood.
No.
It's survival and resilience,
And that
music carries that
connection together, that I'm not alone, we're in this together, there's others that understand, and there's strength in that, right? Just knowing that you've been heard and that we're doing this together.
And I think there's a learning curve too for the audience, I think, because we all come from more of a pop concept. I think I sent that email out, I can't remember his name was Trotman, sax guy, but he talked about the whole smooth jazz thing, kind of evolved into about the song, and early fusion works were more about the musicians and what they're contributing as artists and conversation and stories, and how far that's come. It's just got slaughtered radio play and all that kind of stuff, but the audience lost the ability to enjoy the musicians. And I've always appreciated YouTube when you're watching groups, like Yellow Jackets or whoever, and they capture, these guys have been playing together forever, and they capture, like Ferrante smiling at what Haslip just did, or, whatever the band is, that's just one thing, and the appreciation going on even after all these years, oh, I love what you just did there.
Yeah.
And then you can, hear, oh yeah, he just picked that up and he's going with that and stuff like that. The audience doesn't often hear that, and so I've always wondered how to, even with the group we're working with, that's sort of something that's starting to come up, and at the end we were hearing people integrating other components of people's stuff, and it was very satisfying, and them listening difference, but how do we bring a worship congregation along in the jazz context to appreciate that interaction.
Especially the, how, you know, we talk about dissonance, being able to sit in the dissonance, and that's a hard one to get people who maybe don't know how to appreciate. You know, I think that's the thing is,
Yeah.
we probably, you know, how do we help the audience to connect in and give them permission to be able to sit in the dissonance, as opposed, you know,
That's
because
a
they're like,
great way
they just
of
get a
phrasing
couple,
it.
I don't know what this means, and I don't understand it, right?
Yeah.
But what can we do? You know, maybe it's just, you know, I've sometimes said, you know, sometimes there's gonna be sounds that clash, but that's what life is like, right? We clash, and, you know, just giving them some sort of visual or image that helps them to connect with the
what they
music,
know,
and not
yeah.
with what they know, and not kind of be like, I have no idea what he's doing, you know. But yeah, so that's maybe things that we can do as jazz musicians, whatever kind of jazz we're doing. How do I help the congregation or the audience or who to be able to access this and learn how to be comfortable, even if it's
Yeah.
you know, without it making it a, you know, we're all gonna, you know, teaching zone,
Turn to
but
page 3 of your notes.
yeah.
For the next 5 minutes, we're going to mess with your life.
Yeah, that's right. But to invite them in, yeah,
That's right.
invite them in.
Do
give
not
them
panic,
permission.
we will put it back together in the following 5 minutes. No.
Yeah. And sometimes it's just helping them to think a different way.
Yes,
Even just
yeah.
saying something that kind of opens their minds,
Yeah.
you know, to, you're not necessarily having to educate them, but even just saying, you know, as in life, you know, sometimes it's chaotic and sometimes it's messiness, so musically, we're just expressing that, you know, and something that just kind of,
Oh,
okay,
sorry.
yeah, go ahead, I'm done.
There's a great book by Mary Catherine Bateson called Composing a Life.
Yes.
And in that book, she tells the story of 5 women. And the example is jazz, because everybody improvises their life. They stitch together various experiences, horrific and beautiful, elegant and not so elegant. And I love that, because in a certain way, worship can be a way of, if jazz is involved, of inviting people to see their own journey as an improvisational act.
Yeah.
And, you know, I think that's part of what people witness in a jazz performance, is that, wow, there's spontaneous composition up there, and it's collective, and that's exciting. And, you know,
Yeah.
people get drawn into that, maybe because life's that way.
Yeah,
I don't know what it would mean to, maybe not educate, but to create a worship where everybody feels like, oh yeah, I'm a part of that
you drive
storytelling
by the end, yeah.
too.
Mhm.
Yeah. Bye.